The night I called Lucian Voss, I had a split lip, a broken lock on my front door, and exactly $3 in my wallet. I remember standing in my kitchen with my back pressed against the cabinet, listening to Theo's car idle in the driveway. He hadn't left. He was just sitting out there, engine running, waiting. That's what scared me more than anything he'd already done. The waiting. The way he knew that silence was its own kind of violence. I'd met Theo Barker 18 months earlier at a fundraiser for the Chicago Symphony. I was there on behalf of my firm. I was a forensic accountant at Stiles & Crane, which meant I spent my days untangling other people's financial disasters. Theo was charming in the way that some men are charming when they want something. All attention, all warmth, making you feel like you were the only person in the room. He brought me coffee without asking how I took it, and somehow got it exactly right. I thought that meant he was perceptive. I didn't understand yet that it meant he'd been watching. We dated for 8 months before he moved in. Another 4 before I started noticing things. Small things at first. He'd mentioned something I'd said to a friend in a private text. He'd be upset about where I'd had lunch, not because he had a reason, just because I hadn't mentioned it. He started driving me to work. Just to spend time together, he said. I thought it was sweet. I was still thinking it was sweet when he told my colleague Dara that I was emotionally fragile and probably shouldn't be handling high-stress cases. I didn't find that out until much later. By the time I understood what was happening, I'd already lost most of my independence in the ways that matter. My savings account had his name on it. He'd suggested that when we moved in together, said it was practical, said it was what couples did. My lease was in both our names. Half my work contacts had quietly drifted away because I kept canceling on them, and they eventually stopped asking. I didn't cancel because I wanted to. I canceled because it was easier than explaining the mood I'd come home to if I didn't. I want to say I knew that wasn't love. I want to say I saw it clearly. But when you're inside it, you spend most of your time trying to figure out what you did wrong so you can do better next time. The night everything broke open started over nothing. It always starts over nothing. I'd worked late on a reconciliation report for a client whose books were a decade-deep mess, and I hadn't texted him when I left the office. 45 minutes. That's all it was. He was in the kitchen when I got home, and the temperature of that room told me everything before he said a single word. I won't describe all of it. Some of it I still can't say out loud. What I'll say is that by the end he'd put his fist through the drywall next to the bathroom door, thrown my work laptop across the living room, and grabbed my arm hard enough that I felt it for 2 weeks after. And then he left. Got in his car, drove away. I thought it was over. He came back 40 minutes later. I heard the car pull in and I just froze. My phone was in my hand. I'd been about to call 911, but something stopped me. I don't know how to explain it except to say that I was scared of what happened after. Scared of the report, the questions, the look on people's faces when I told them I hadn't seen it coming. Scared of what he would do when they let him go. So instead of calling the police, I scrolled to a name I almost never called. Lucian Voss. I worked for his company. Not directly for him. I'd been contracted through Stiles & Crane to audit the books of Voss Capital Holdings, a private equity firm that was quietly one of the largest in the Midwest. Lucian Voss was the kind of man whose name you said carefully. His family had built half of Chicago's meatpacking infrastructure in the 1920s before pivoting into real estate, and the pivot had apparently come with some baggage that nobody discussed in polite company. There were rumors. There had always been rumors. I'd been told before I started the engagement not to ask about certain subsidiaries. I had been working with him for 6 weeks. In that time, he'd been professional, direct, and occasionally unsettling in the way that very controlled people are unsettling. You never knew what was underneath because nothing ever slipped. He called me Miss Aldrich in every meeting. He'd once paused our entire audit debrief because he noticed I'd skipped lunch and sent someone to get food without asking me. When I thanked him, he just said, "You work better when you're not running on coffee and stress," and moved on. I didn't know why I was calling him. I just knew that I needed someone who wasn't afraid of Theo Barker sitting in my driveway. He picked up on the second ring. "It's Miss Aldrich." His voice was the same as it was in every meeting. Quiet, certain, like the world arranged itself around him and not the other way around. I meant to say something professional. I meant to apologize for calling at, I looked at the clock, 10:47 at night. Instead, what came out was, "I need help, I'm sorry. I don't know who else to call." 3 seconds of silence. "Are you hurt?" My voice broke on the word. "A little. Yes, where are you?" I told him. He asked if the person who hurt me was still there. I told him the car was in the driveway. I heard something shift on his end. A chair, maybe, or a door. And then he said, "Don't open the door for anyone except me. I'll be there in 20 minutes. "You don't have to, Evangeline." He said my first name like it was a decision. "Don't open the door." He hung up. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the island and watched the window over the sink. The car didn't move. Theo had his music on now, which was somehow worse than the silence. This performance of patience, of him reminding me that he could wait as long as it took. I counted the minutes. I pressed a dish towel to my lip and stared at the dark window and counted. Lucien Voss arrived in 18 minutes. I know what happened in the driveway because I moved to the window and watched it. I don't know what was said. Lucien got out of a black Escalade, walked to Theo's car, and knocked on the window once. Theo rolled it down. There was a conversation. I couldn't read lips, and I couldn't hear anything through the glass, but I could see Theo's face go through several different expressions in the space of about 90 seconds. Irritation, then something more cautious, then a look I'd never seen on him before. Fear. Theo's car backed out of the driveway 6 minutes after Lucien arrived. I watched the taillights disappear down the street, and I didn't move for a long moment. Then Lucien walked to my front door and knocked twice. I let him in. He looked at my face first, then at the laptop in pieces on the living room floor, then at the hole in the drywall down the hall. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he looked back at me. "Can I see your arm?" I held it out. He turned it over carefully, examined the bruising. His expression didn't change, but something around his eyes did. "You should put ice on this," he said. "Do you have ice?" "In the freezer." Obviously. I laughed, which surprised me. It was a weird hiccupy sound. "Sorry. I don't know why I laughed. Thank you for coming. I didn't know who else to call. I'm sorry for calling so late. Stop apologizing." He found the ice himself, wrapped it in a dish towel, and handed it to me. Then he sat across from me at my kitchen table, like it was the most normal thing in the world, and he said, "Tell me about him." So I did. I told him about the fundraiser and the coffee and the 18 months. I told him about my savings account and my lease, and the clients I'd lost because I kept canceling. I told him about the 45 minutes and the laptop and the drywall and the car idling in my driveway for 40 minutes after. I talked for probably 30 minutes, and he didn't interrupt me once. He didn't say I should have left sooner or ask why I didn't see it coming. He just listened. When I was done, I felt hollowed out in the way you do after you cry, except I hadn't cried. I'd just finally said it out loud to another person. "He'll come back," I said. "Won't he?" "Probably," Lucien said. "People like that usually do." He paused. "Unless they're given a compelling reason not to." I looked at him. "What did you say to him tonight?" He didn't answer that directly. What he said instead was, "You don't have to stay here tonight. I have a property in Lincoln Park. It's empty. It's not under your name. He won't find it. I can't just..." Evangeline. There was that sound again. My name like a decision. "You have a broken lock, a man who knows your address, and a face that looks like it lost an argument with a doorframe. There is no version of tonight where you're fine alone." He wasn't wrong. I packed a bag. He waited in the kitchen, not hovering, just there. When I came back out, he looked at the bag and then at me, and he said, "Good." That was it. I stayed in the Lincoln Park apartment for 3 days. It was a beautiful, quiet place on a tree-lined street, full of good light and someone else's books. Lucien had someone drop groceries without me asking. He texted once each day to check in, not to chat, not to fill the silence, just a single line, "Everything all right?" And I'd say yes, and that would be that. On the 3rd day, I went back to my apartment with a locksmith, changed every lock, and packed everything of Theo's into boxes that I left on the curb. I had a lawyer friend, Sadie, one of the few friendships that had survived the last year, draft a cease and desist. I opened a new bank account with only my name on it, and began the quiet, boring, necessary work of separating my financial life from his. He texted. He called. He showed up once and found the locks changed and a very clear note on the door, referencing Sadie's letter. He left. I know he left because Lucien had told him what would happen if he didn't. I know this because Sadie, who did some digging, came back with a look on her face I couldn't quite categorize and said, "Your client, Voss, he's not someone people say no to." I told her I was aware. She said, "I mean, Evie, really not someone people say no to." I told her I understood. I told her, and then I sat with it for a while, because there was something uncomfortable in being grateful for exactly that. I went back to work at Voss Capital Holdings the following Monday. I expected it to be awkward. It wasn't. Lucian was in the conference room when I arrived, going over something with his CFO, and when I walked in he looked up and said, "Good morning, Miss Aldrich," exactly the way he always had, and turned back to the spreadsheet. That was somehow worse than if he'd made it into something. I approached him after the CFO left. I had prepared a professional, measured thank you. What I said instead was, "You didn't have to do any of that, and I've been trying to figure out how to say thank you properly for 4 days. He looked at me for a moment. "You don't need to." "I do, though. Then consider it said," he said, "and move on." I almost laughed again. "You're not going to make this easy, are you?" Making things easy is rarely my strong suit. He paused, something shifting fractionally in his expression. "You look better than you did last week." The bar was pretty low. It was, he agreed, and there was something in his voice that wasn't quite warmth but was adjacent to it. Like warmth seen through frosted glass. "I'm glad you called." I went back to my audit. I told myself to leave it there. I didn't entirely. The thing about going through something like that is that it doesn't end when the danger ends. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. convinced I could hear a car idling outside. I'd catch myself apologizing for things that didn't need apologies, for taking too long at the coffee station, for asking a question in a meeting, for existing in space at a normal human volume. I started therapy with a woman named Dr. Osi, who had an office in the Loop, and a talent for asking the question that made you realize you already knew the answer. I'd lost a lot of ground on myself in 18 months. I had to find my way back to knowing what I thought, what I wanted, what I actually felt, as opposed to what I'd been trained to feel. It took time. It wasn't linear. Some weeks I felt like myself, and some weeks I still flinched when someone raised their voice on the street. Through all of it, I kept working the Voss Capital engagement. Lucian and I developed something over those months that I don't have a clean word for. We had lunch sometimes. He'd appear at the door of the conference room around noon and say something like, "You haven't eaten. The Thai place downstairs has a decent lunch special." And I'd follow him because it was easier than arguing and also because I wanted to. He started calling me Evie. I don't know when exactly. It crept up gradually, the way seasons do. And by the time I noticed it, it had already been happening for a while. I never asked him to stop. He was not easy to know. He was private in the way that people are private when they've learned that information is leverage, and leverage can be used against you. He talked about work, about the city, about what he was reading. He read constantly, novels mostly, which surprised me. But he didn't talk about himself in the way most people eventually do when they're getting to know someone. I had to gather him in fragments. The way he'd gone still when I mentioned once that my father had died when I was 12. The way he'd gotten quietly furious when he found out his CFO had taken credit for an analyst's work. The way he'd looked at me the first time I pushed back on him in a meeting. Actually challenged his interpretation of a finding, and the look wasn't irritation. It was something closer to satisfaction. I was falling for him the way you fall for something complicated. Slowly, and then all at once, and with the constant low-level anxiety of someone who has already learned what it costs to trust the wrong person. I told Dr. Osi. She asked me what felt different about him. I had a lot of answers, but the most honest one was, he made me feel safer when things were at their worst, and then he disappeared back behind the glass like it hadn't happened, and he never once made me feel like I owed him for it. She asked me what I made of the rumors about his family. I said I didn't know. I said I knew what I'd seen. I said that people were complicated and that choosing someone because they seemed uncomplicated had already cost me 18 months of my life. She said, "That's not nothing." The engagement at Voss Capital was winding down. I had 6 more weeks. I started to feel it, this low hum of something about to end, and I didn't know what to do with it. I couldn't stay on the engagement indefinitely. I couldn't manufacture more audit findings just to keep coming back. I had told myself for months that whatever this was, It lived entirely within the context of professional contact, and when the professional contact ended, I would let it go quietly and move on. I was lying to myself, and I knew it. 4 weeks before the end of the engagement, I was working late on a final set of supporting schedules, alone in the conference room. The building was mostly empty. Lucian appeared in the doorway at close to 8 o'clock with 2 cups of coffee and set one on the table in front of me without saying anything. I looked up. He sat across from me. "You don't have to stay," I said. "I know." We sat in silence for a while. I worked. He drank his coffee and looked out at the city lights, and I tried very hard not to think about how much I was going to miss this exact configuration of things when it was over. "The engagement ends in 4 weeks," I said finally. "I know. I kept my eyes on the spreadsheet. I don't think I should keep coming back after that, professionally. There isn't enough scope remaining to justify a continued relationship with my firm." Silence. "Although," I said, "it's possible that I could justify a different kind of continued relationship." I didn't look up when I said it. I stared at the cell I was working on and waited. "Evie." His voice was different, quieter, somehow, even though it was already quiet. "Look at me." I looked up. "I've been trying," he said, "to give you time. You went through something. I wasn't going to push." "You weren't pushing," I said. "That was actually the problem. You were so carefully not pushing that I was starting to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing." Something moved behind his eyes. "You didn't imagine it, no?" "No." He held my gaze. "I've been calling you Evie for 5 months. I had a driver take groceries to a woman I'd known for 6 weeks because I couldn't stop thinking about whether she'd eaten. I sat in your kitchen at 11 o'clock at night and thought about 3 very specific things I was going to do to the man who put his hands on you." A pause. "You didn't imagine any of it. My heart was doing something complicated." "The 3 things," I said. "Should I ask?" "Probably not. Did you do them?" He met my eyes. "Some of them." I should have felt something conflicted about that. Maybe I did, a little. But mostly what I felt was steady, like the ground under me had finally stopped shifting. "I'm going to need you to be honest with me," I said. "About who you are, not all at once. But eventually, because I spent a 1.5 years with someone who wasn't honest with me, and I can't do that again. I know, and I'm not someone who needs to be protected from information. I'm a forensic accountant. I find things people hide for a living. So if there's something in your life you think I can't handle, I need you to let me decide that." He was quiet for a moment. "That's fair," he said. "Is it something you can do?" "Yes." No hesitation. I nodded. I looked back at my spreadsheet, then closed the laptop. "Okay," I said. "Okay, you should probably take me to dinner first, before anything else, somewhere that isn't a Thai lunch special." The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile. On him it was close enough. "I'll make a reservation, somewhere good, Evie." He picked up his coffee. "Everything I do is somewhere good." I laughed, a real one this time, nothing hiccupy about it, and the sound of it surprised me. Surprised us both, maybe, because something in his face softened in a way I hadn't seen before. I thought about who I'd been 18 months ago. Walking into a fundraiser, thinking charming meant safe, thinking attentiveness meant care. I'd lost so much of myself so quietly that I hadn't even heard it go. Getting it back was slow and ordinary, and mostly happened in a therapist's office and in the early mornings when I made myself coffee and sat with my own thoughts without apologizing for them. It wasn't a dramatic recovery, it was just incremental. Choosing myself, repeatedly, until it started to feel like something I deserved. Lucian was not uncomplicated. I knew that. I knew there were parts of his world I'd have to learn to navigate, facts about his family and his history, and those subsidiaries I'd been told not to ask about. I knew there would be conversations I wasn't ready for yet, and truths that would take time to land, but I also knew what it felt like to have someone show up when they didn't have to. To have someone sit in your kitchen at 11 o'clock at night and hand you ice wrapped in a dish towel and not make you feel small for needing it. To have someone say your name like it mattered, like you were worth choosing, and then give you the space to choose for yourself. Theo had made himself my whole world by making my world small enough to fit in his hands. Lucian made me feel like the world was large again, and I could move through it. That's not a small thing. After where I'd been, that was everything. We went to dinner that Friday, a restaurant in the West Loop. Chef's tasting menu, 3 hours, wine I'd never heard of. He told me one thing about himself that night that I hadn't known before, something real, and I told him one thing in return. The next week, one more each. It went like that for a while. Not all at once. Just piece by piece, the way trust actually works. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning in my apartment, not the Lincoln Park one, my own place, with the locks I'd chosen and the lease and only my name, I was standing in my kitchen getting coffee when Lucien came up behind me and said, very quietly near my ear, "I have a question." I turned around. He was holding something. Small box. His expression was its usual controlled, unreadable thing, except for a flicker in it that I recognized now as the one that meant he was nervous, which was rare enough that seeing it made my chest go tight. "You don't have to say yes right away," he said. "You can think about it. Lucien, I want to give you time if you—" "Lucien," I put my hand over his. "Ask me," he asked me. I said yes before he finished the sentence.